You don't contribute anything around here. Either start pulling your weight or find somewhere else to live. My son-in-law said that to me on a Tuesday night in November. He didn't raise his voice. He said it the way you'd tell someone the dishwasher was full. Flat, matter of fact, like it was simply the state of things. My daughter was standing behind him in the kitchen doorway. She didn't say a word. I looked at him for a moment, then I looked at her. Then I nodded, said good night, and walked to my room. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I kept thinking about how I'd ended up there in the first place. How a man who'd spent 34 years working, building, raising a family, paying off a house in Brantford and putting 2 kids through school, could find himself lying on a guest bed in Mississauga at 61 years old, being told he wasn't contributing enough. My wife, Carol, passed away 2.5 years before that night. Pancreatic cancer. She was 58. We'd been married 31 years, and I won't pretend those were all easy years, but they were ours. After she died, the house felt like something I was just moving through rather than living in. I'd walk into the kitchen in the morning and stand there for a full minute before I remembered why I came in. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter here, because that's what she is, called me about 4 months after the funeral. She and her husband had bought a place in Mississauga the year before. 4 bedrooms, finished basement, double garage. She said they had the room. She said it would be good for me to be around for family. She said she worried about me being alone in Brantford. I asked her if she'd talked to her husband about it. She said of course she had. She said he thought it was a great idea. I should have made some calls, asked a few more questions, talked to my son, who lives in Edmonton, who later told me he had a bad feeling about the whole thing, but didn't want to say so at the time. Instead, I listed the house. It sold in 11 days. I packed up what fit in a U-Haul and what didn't went to my brother-in-law's garage or to Habitat for Humanity. I moved in on a Saturday in early March. The drive from Brantford takes about an hour and 15 minutes on a good day. My son-in-law, I'll call him that throughout, met me in the driveway. He shook my hand, helped carry a few boxes, and then went inside to watch the hockey game. That was fine. It was a Saturday. I didn't expect a parade. The room they gave me was on the main floor next to the laundry. It had a window that looked out onto the side of the neighbor's house. There was a small closet and a single bed that my daughter had bought at IKEA. It was a perfectly reasonable room. I unpacked my bags, put my books on the floor because there was no shelf, and went to find something to eat. The kitchen was clean and well stocked. My daughter had left a note on the counter saying there was leftover pasta in the fridge and to help myself. I ate it standing up because everyone had already had dinner. That first week, I tried to be useful without getting in the way. I did my own laundry. I cleaned up after myself in the bathroom. I offered to help with dinner a couple of times, and my daughter said sure if I wanted to. I made a pot of chili on Wednesday that went over well. My son-in-law had 2 bowls and didn't say much, but he ate it, which I took as a good sign. By the second week, something had shifted. Not dramatically. That's not how these things work. It's more like a tide coming in. You don't see the water moving, but then you look down and your shoes are wet. My daughter asked if I could start dinner on the nights she had her late shift. She worked in hospital administration at Trillium Health Partners Tuesday and Thursday evenings until 7:30. Of course, I said. That was easy enough. I liked cooking. Carol used to say I was better at it than I gave myself credit for. Then my son-in-law started making requests. Not rude, exactly, just constant. Could I pick up milk on my way back from my walk? Could I take the car in for an oil change since I had the time? Could I shovel the walk before he left for work because his back was acting up? I did all of these things because they were reasonable asks, and because I was living in their house, and because I genuinely wanted to help. What I didn't notice, not at first, was that the word help had quietly disappeared from the conversation. Nobody was asking for my help anymore. They were just telling me what needed to be done. I retired from teaching the year before Carol got sick. 28 years in the classroom, mostly high school history and civics in Brantford. When you retire, people always say you'll be bored. They're wrong. I wasn't bored. I had my routine, morning walk along the trail by the Grand River, afternoon reading, cooking dinner, calling my son on Sundays. I had a life that was quiet and mine. In Mississauga, that life disappeared. Not all at once, and not by any single decision. It just compressed itself into the space of whatever was left over after everything else was done. I was doing the grocery shopping, full weekly shop, not just picking things up, by the end of March. I was doing the laundry for all 3 of us by April. My daughter said she was just so tired by the time she got home, and I was there anyway, so it only made sense. My son-in-law said his back was a chronic problem. I didn't know enough about his back to argue. I started keeping a rough mental tally somewhere around the 6th week, the way you do when something starts to feel off, but you haven't put words to it yet. On a typical week, I was cooking dinner 5 nights out of 7. I was doing all the grocery shopping. I was doing 3 loads of laundry, sometimes 4. I was handling any errand that required being home during the day. The plumber, the furnace inspection, the Rogers technician. I vacuumed twice a week because my son-in-law had allergies. I shoveled the walk every time it snowed, and that winter it snowed constantly. I was not asked how I was doing. Not once. Not by either of them. There was an evening in April when my daughter had some friends over. 3 women from her department, a bottle of wine, takeout from the Thai place on Dundas. I'd cooked that afternoon a roast chicken with potatoes and green beans, and I'd left it on the stove before slipping out to my room to give them space. Around 9, I came out to get a glass of water. One of her friends said, "Oh, is this your dad?" She turned to my daughter and said, "Your dad's so sweet for making dinner." My daughter smiled and said, "Oh, I know." No one addressed that to me directly. I got my water and went back to my room. That was the night I first thought clearly about leaving. Not dramatically. Not packing bags and walking out into the snow. Just quietly, the way you think about a decision when you already know what it is, but aren't ready to say it out loud yet. I lay in bed listening to them laugh in the next room, and thought about how much Carol would have had to say about all of this. She had opinions, clear ones. She would not have lasted 6 weeks. The thing that people who haven't been through it don't understand is that the hardest part isn't the work. I'm not afraid of work. The hardest part is the specific kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who simply forget you're there. My daughter didn't dislike me. I don't think she ever once thought of herself as doing anything wrong. I was her dad and I was there, and things needed doing, and that was the full extent of the calculation. What I missed was being someone's person, not a resource, not a convenient presence, someone's actual person. In May, I drove out to Oakville to have lunch with a former colleague of mine, a man I'd taught with for nearly 15 years. He'd retired a couple of years before me. We sat in a diner on Lake Shore and split a club sandwich, and he asked me how things were going. I told him honestly, not everything, but enough. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know they have a 2-bedroom at my building, 1 floor below me. Seniors residence, independent living. They've got a common room, a library, organized trips if you want them, but you've got your own kitchen, your own space, you come and go as you please." He said the rent was reasonable. He told me what he paid, and that for what the Brantford house had sold for, I could be comfortable for a long time without touching my CPP or my pension. I drove back to Mississauga and sat in the car in the driveway for about 20 minutes. I didn't do anything that day, but something had been set in motion that I couldn't quite set back. The moment I can point to, the moment when it became concrete rather than abstract, happened on the first Saturday of June. My daughter and son-in-law were having people over for dinner. His colleagues from work, apparently an annual thing. I'd spent the better part of Friday and Saturday afternoon cooking. A brisket that I'd started Thursday night, potato salad from scratch, coleslaw, rolls from the Portuguese bakery on Hurontario. The house smelled good. I thought we'd all sit down together. At 5:30, my daughter came into the kitchen and said they were going to need me to eat in my room that evening. The guests were people her husband worked with, and she didn't want things to be complicated. She said it the way you'd say the dining room table was too small. Just a logistical issue, nothing personal. I asked her to say that again. She repeated it. She said I could make myself a plate, and she'd bring me a drink if I wanted one. She smiled when she said it, which was the part I couldn't quite get past. I looked at the brisket. I looked at the potato salad. I thought about Carol. I made myself a plate, and I took it to my room. I ate alone at the small desk by the window that looked out onto the neighbor's house, and I sat there for a long time after I finished, not crying. I was past crying about things like this, just sitting. The next morning, Sunday, I called my colleague in Oakville from my car. I asked him if the 2-bedroom was still available. He made a call and phoned me back in the afternoon. It was. I contacted a property manager the following week. I went to see the unit on a Thursday, taking the QEW out to Oakville while my daughter thought I was at a doctor's appointment. The apartment was on the 4th floor. It had a small balcony looking out over a courtyard with a maple tree. The kitchen was modest but workable. There was a shelf in the second bedroom where I could put my books. I put down the deposit that afternoon. I didn't tell anyone, not my daughter, not her husband. I called my son that night and told him, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Dad, I think that's the right call." He said he wished he'd said something sooner. I told him there was nothing to say sooner. I had to see it for myself. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved things out gradually. When my daughter and her husband were at work, I'd load the car. Books first, then the things from my closet that I'd never really unpacked. My tools from the garage, the cast iron pan that had been Carol's mother's, which I'd brought from Brantford, and which no one had ever asked about. I gave notice on the 1st of July, which in my head felt fitting. A fresh start, a new month, summer beginning. I left a note on the kitchen table because I didn't want a scene. I said I'd found a place of my own in Oakville, and that I was grateful for the time, and that I hoped they understood. I said we could talk when they were ready. I took the last box to my car, went back inside for a final look around, and then I drove west on the QEW with the windows down. I want to be precise about what I felt in that car. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to pressure being released. The sensation you get when a sound you'd stopped hearing suddenly stops, and you realize it had been there all along. My colleague was waiting in the lobby with a bottle of wine from the LCBO and a card that said, "Welcome home" on the front. We sat on my balcony that evening, the maple tree in the courtyard going orange at the edges, and talked until it got dark. That was a good evening, one of the better ones I've had in a while. My daughter called the next morning at 8:15. I didn't answer. She called again at 9, and at 9:40, and twice more before noon. My son-in-law called at some point in the afternoon. I didn't recognize the number at first, because he had never called me before, not once in the 2 years they'd been married. By the end of the second day, I had 23 missed calls between the two of them. By the end of the week, that number was over 40. I texted my daughter on day 4. I said I was settled, I was well, and I needed some time. I said I'd reach out when I was ready. She texted back immediately. She said she didn't understand, that I'd seemed fine, that she wished I'd talked to her. She said she and her husband had really valued having me there. She used the word valued. I read that word several times. My son-in-law sent a message 2 days after that. It was 3 lines. He said he hoped I was okay. He said things had gotten busy and he knew they probably hadn't been as attentive as they should have been. He said if there was anything he could do to let him know. I appreciated that message more than I expected to. It wasn't much, but it was something. I didn't call either of them for 3 weeks. I needed to remember who I was outside of that house, outside of the laundry room and the grocery lists and the dinners I cooked and ate alone. It takes longer than you'd think. You have to get quiet enough to hear yourself again. I set up my kitchen the way I wanted it. I put my books on the shelf in the second bedroom. I started walking again. There's a trail along the lakefront in Oakville, and in July the light off the water in the mornings is something. I went back to cooking because I actually enjoy it, not because a list was waiting for me on the counter. I made chili. I made the roast chicken with potatoes. I had my colleague over for dinner one Friday, and we talked about history, the actual subject, the thing I'd spent my career on, for the first time in months. I called my daughter at the end of July. We talked for almost an hour. It was hard, parts of it, she cried. She said she hadn't realized how much they'd been putting on me, and I believe her when she says she didn't. That's the honest truth. People don't usually realize they're doing it. That doesn't make it less true. I told her I loved her. I told her that wasn't the question. The question was whether she saw me as a person or as a convenience, and that I needed her to sit with that for a while without defending herself. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I think I owe you an apology, Dad." I said, "Yes, I think you do. We're in a different place now, better." She drove out to Oakville last month with a plant for my balcony. One of those hardy ones that can take the cold, and we had lunch at a place near the water. Her husband texted me on my birthday in September. It was brief, but it was the right kind of brief. "Happy birthday, hope you're enjoying that balcony." I am. I really am. I think about the version of myself that stayed, that kept shoveling the walk and doing the laundry and eating alone while other people sat at the table I'd cooked for. I think about how easy it would have been to keep going. Not because it was good, but because it was known. Because disruption takes energy that grief already spent. But here's what I've learned, and I'm 62 now, so I've had time to learn a few things. A man who makes himself invisible to keep the peace hasn't kept anything. He's just disappeared. Carol always said I was too patient. She meant it as a criticism. I think she was right. I go for my walk most mornings before 7, when the light on the water is still thin and there's almost nobody on the trail. I make coffee when I get back, I read. Sometimes I call my son, and we talk about nothing in particular. Hockey, a book I'm working through, what his kids have been up to. He has 3 boys, and they are loud and excellent. And they call me Grandpa with the kind of confidence that makes you feel like you've been doing something right all along. My life is not a dramatic story. I didn't win anything. I just left a place where I wasn't seen, found a place where I could be, and started over at an age when a lot of people have stopped. That turns out to be enough. More than enough, actually. It turns out to be everything.